Hey guys, welcome to my channel. It's been a very long time since I posted anything on here, I know. And in that time frame, there's been a lot different in my life. I went ahead and finished school up. Haven't quite gotten a new job for what I learned yet. My family's kind of going through some hard times right now. Some people being in the middle of dying, basically. And probably one of the bigger things for me and for my whole family has been that I came out publicly as transgender recently. Um, and the latter of those things is going to be the main topic of this video. So, normally, what I tend to post, and will probably continue to post probably like once or twice a month, we'll see, but in the future is going to be game stuff. And in the background of this is going to be kind of just, hey, this is the kind of games that I like playing, which is kind of all over the place. But I kind of felt like that this video itself is going to be something that I want to put out there, so just so it's out there. Because I don't think my view on things is very shared by many people. So, first things first, there's a few different things that I go by name-wise. My name that I was given at birth is Duncan. The in-game name that kind of evolved from that was Dunkman357. Most of my stuff has kind of changed over to my new in-game name, which is Fat Platypus. But that's mostly because, well, I like Fat Platypus better than Dunkman. The name that I'm going to be changing my real name to is going to be Angela, and that is, some people actually know me as that, so that's kind of why I'm just putting this out there. So whenever you hear me respond to a name that you're not familiar with, those are basically the four things that I respond to, or different versions of those. So basically that's that. The next thing up is the title of this video, so kind of is a big thing where it's like, how the hell can someone be all three of these things? Christian, conservative, and transgender. So basically that's what this whole video is going to be about, is how someone can be all three of these things at once and they're not necessarily completely contradictory to each other. So let's get into it then. So, a little bit of background here about myself. I personally have struggled with wanting to live as a woman since I was around 8 years old. That's about what I kind of remember. When I was 16, I was almost ready to start talking about it to my parents at the time, because basically I kind of had held in everything about that and not tried my darndest to not show anything about it. The biggest problem that I had back then was for a long time I kind of kept in a lot of that stuff. A little bit more side tangent here. I was horribly bullied for 6 years leading up to my high school years. I changed schools over after I was done with middle school to go to a Christian private school for high school, and I actually started making friends at that point in time in my life because I didn't really have any up until then, other than one or two outside of school. So back on track, I started to kind of notice that people really wouldn't take well to my transition and wouldn't agree with it. The people who I was making friends with at the time. I also noticed that every choice that I had was going to affect everyone around me. Everyone who was a part of my life, and would impact them probably severely in certain respects. So basically at that point I just kind of decided to bury it. Started treating it like somewhat of a sin issue in that sense. I kind of looked at it and like, this is bad, this is wrong, this is evil for me to even think about. I totally was afraid of rejection from anyone who ever even thought that I was having issues with these things. I thought that it would just look so horribly on me, and it was kind of a little bit self-centered in that. But I also kind of had myself at a point convinced that if I just didn't think about things long enough, that they just would go away, that everything would be fine at that point. I had myself so convinced that I just felt so guilty every time something like that would come back into my head. and that I was just an awful person for it. I had to deal with that for 6 years. I tried a lot of things that kind of to try to make everyone happy with my life. The way I was living it, whatever it was at the time. I didn't want to hurt anyone by any choice that I made. I was attempt I attempted to join the military, and that didn't work out. I had to leave after 6 days of actual training because my medical issues came up, and like I had a lot of physical and mental medical issues that just prevented me from doing anything. And it took me a while to realize how awful my mindset was. I was very suicidal. Didn't even realize it. Mostly because I had already put out of my mind taking my own life in the way of shooting myself, stabbing myself, cutting my wrists. I wasn't really one for doing self-harm. In a way, I kind of looked at it as I was too much of a coward to do it, in a way. It took me until like a couple of years ago that I realized, well, constantly wishing yourself to not exist, um, constantly wishing that something would just happen that would just end your life is along the lines of suicidal. Even if you're not saying, "Oh God, I'm gonna go shoot myself or hang myself or something like, or jump off a bridge." I was in a very, very awful state of mind, but I couldn't do anything about it because, for one, I didn't want to admit the real reasons why. I didn't want to have to deal with the fact that I was depressed because of my gender dysphoria, and I tried to just bury myself in doing church work at the time. I was so worried about causing other people pain that I neglected myself for a long time. I attempted to even eventually it got to the point where I had to talk to someone about my whole gender issues, and I didn't understand them at the time. And I went to a pastor who didn't really understand and assumed a lot, and it didn't really help me out. And basically, the thing was told was just man up, just man up, and start thinking more about other people's views of yourself. And if you ever have these things come up in your life, in your head again, just think about, oh my gosh, what would your friends think if they knew what you were thinking about? So it was a year and a half, probably a year and a half ago now, that I finally broke and admitted to myself that I was suicidal and that I seriously needed to go see a therapist. I actually, funnily enough, asked my pastor, because I still trusted him very much so at the time, where I could go find a good therapist. It was at that moment that I kind of chose, look, I need to get everything out to someone. I need to be able to talk about everything. And eventually, it kind of took me a while to talk to that therapist that I was recommended to. The couple months of even talking to her, because I even feared rejection from her at that point. But eventually I got everything out, and a few months after that is when I started making the choice to start making changes in my life and actually possibly look at transition as an option. A few months after that is when I actually decided to transition and to start working towards that. Alright, so now I've gotten on my backstory a bit, it's time for me to get to the point of this video. I've been suffering with a mental condition, called gender dysphoria. I did call it a mental condition because that's exactly what it is, a mental condition that's a medical issue. It is a medical thing which probably needs medical treatment. It depends on the severity of it, so right now the only medical treatment that they have out there is transitioning. And really, that's not that great of a choice. It might work for some, but the suicide rate shows sometimes it's not. And it's super, super high as a suicide rate for small percentage of people. So, for me personally, it took me a lot to kind of realize that transition was probably the only real way for me to get through it. Where I'm going to stop, I've gotten a very okay idea of where how far I want to go with my transition, but that doesn't mean that where I stop is going to be where someone else wants to stop, or how far I go is going to be how far someone else needs to go. It's very, very flawed in the way that it works. It's hard on your body. It's hard to even incorporate yourself in life because of people's stigmas towards people like that. I guess for me, I want there to be work on a cure. I really do. It's so taboo to even say, oh my god, you can't cure people for who they are. But you wouldn't honestly say something like that to a person that's like, do you want to cure something like autism? Do you want to cure something like bipolar disorder? Do you want to cure like just other mental conditions? Like if there was a cure for those things, that would be amazing. People would be super super happy with that. They wouldn't say, "Oh, I want this person to stay autistic because it's who they are." They're like, "I want them to be able to function better in life. I want them to be able to interact with everyone better." So, I guess just it just baffles me how hard it is to say how much flack you can get for saying something as simple as I want there to be a cure for gender dysphoria. I want there to be a cure for gender dysphoria. That's basically it. And so many other YouTubers have said this better than me and go into more depth about this, but in the basic things, this is the way I think. Sometimes I really hate politics. Anyways, I guess another thing for that is just like, probably one of the biggest headaches I have is the whole, oh, they're no longer, they're not biological men when it's just, people who say that just bug me so much. It's, you're a fucking tranny, you're born a certain sex, and you're transitioning to the other sex. You're going to be the same biological sex that you were born with, no matter how much surgery, no matter how many drugs. That's what you're gonna be. You may present differently. That doesn't mean that I'm not gonna like look at you, and if you're male to female, look at you as a female if you try. But my God, you're still biologically male. Get over it. All right. So the biggest part, I guess, of this video is the whole I'm Christian. Because, let's face it, being conservative training is no longer that big of a deal anymore. There's so many other people who have kind of pioneered into that. People who have been like, hey, you don't have to have the same politics as certain people. You don't have to look at the world as everyone else expects you to. So, yeah, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe in the Bible. I guess first off is like, well, how do I get past some of these rules, some of these things that people bring up as like, oh, you're doing something wrong with God? And I guess I'll just kind of address the main points that I find with a lot of people. First one, the very famous Deuteronomy 22:5 verse with cross-dressing not being liked. Basically what happens after this verse is it tells you what you should do with a bird's nest alongside of the road. And then later on in that same chapter, it also shows that you're not supposed to wear clothes of wool and linen at the same time. Which, well, I guess we're all sinners then. But I guess the point, that's one of the points that I make. The other point that I make about this is, look, Jesus came, he fulfilled the law. Fulfilled so that way we don't have to be under it. We don't have to be constantly trying to be perfect because he's made us perfect in him. That's that. Like, otherwise we'd be doing sacrifices and never eating bacon and other things like that. The next thing that people like to bring up is, well, God doesn't make mistakes. I agree with that. I agree that God doesn't make mistakes. He honestly doesn't. He is perfect, so he doesn't make any mistakes. Now we have a different understanding of that because Look, I was born with a mental condition. I'm trying to treat it as best I can. Right now, the only treatment is, in fact, transitioning. So, I don't know. I guess probably the thing that I really have a problem with is people who look at me and say, well, you're doing something wrong because they're trying to get treatment for something that I have no control over. And honestly, I don't think God would want me to stay the mindset that I was at for the rest of my life because it was unhealthy. And I guess also the thing I would also bring up to people is like, well, all those mental conditions that you're just born with, you wouldn't tell someone they can't have a cure, they can't get that treated. You wouldn't like forbid someone to take medication for their bipolar medication. Like you wouldn't forbid that, would you? That'd just be like you'd be insane to do that. But when it comes to trying to treat someone with gender dysphoria, suddenly it's awful to even consider that as a treatment because, well, it goes against nature or something like that. Look, I'm not saying that it's not like dangerous. I'm not saying that it couldn't be better because it definitely can. But it's what we got. I guess. All right. So the main point that I really have a problem with, I think, is that people think that I'm just auto doomed to hell. That it's like, oh gosh, I'm a tranny, now I'm doomed. That's it. That's that. And it was something that I struggled with for a while. Well, kind of one of the things that I looked at to kind of help me realize that, look, God loves me, I'm saved. He looks at the heart. That's what he does. He looks at the heart of a person, not necessarily how they look on the outside, but he looks at their heart. And he sees exactly who they are there. I think that one thing kind of helped me out. I don't have to necessarily worry about looking the best of about anything. He looks at my heart. And I guess the next big thing that I kind of had a lot of problems with was I don't lose my salvation. I've been saved for several years already. And I can't do anything to get rid of that. There's nothing that God's not going to just suddenly drop that and say, "Oh, you've decided to do this one thing, so now it's gone." And no, there's a lot of stuff like that like everyone makes mistakes. If anything, is like, hey, you're gonna go out and get a tattoo or something like that, and oh, someone might argue, oh, well, now you're no longer saved anymore. No, that's not how it works. Once you're saved, that's that. It's all in God's hands at that point, and He promises not to take it away, so it's not taken away. Anyways, that's basically it. That's all basically the only things that I really have for arguing, I guess, in a sense. But this is the way I view it. I've got so many other different views that a lot of people probably would disagree with, but we'll leave those for another time, I guess. But yeah, there you are. I think right now all I really need to say is, look, I treat what I'm doing with my transition as a medical treatment. I see it that I look at each step that I take. I make sure that I'm okay where I'm at, that I'm getting better, that I'm improving, and I make sure that everything that I go forward and do is the right choice for me to do. Currently, I'm 4 months on estrogen and 5 months on testosterone blockers, and I'm pretty content about the way things are going. And really, that's it. That's about all I really have to say. Like I said earlier, I could go into more detail about a lot of different things, but I kind of just wanted to be about it, have the basics out there for someone else to come find if they need to. Maybe like I said at the beginning of the video, I might post maybe once or twice a month. I'll probably do a lot more streaming. The link of that is in the description below. Thanks for stopping by, listening. Hey, I'll talk to you all later.